Good evening, everybody. I hope, can I get some thumbs up from the audience that they can see my dumb face and the slides? Not getting any. Oh, there we go. Awesome. Well, welcome to the Great Divide Route webinar. This is the first of this one. We've had, annually we do some pretty great webinars on gear and how to book your permits and the rest, but this is the first of hopefully many Great Divide Route webinars where we can bring in some people who have done something pretty epic and share a bit of information so that you can make some informed decisions about whether this is something you want to do or not. A little bit of housekeeping before we get going. So this webinar is being recorded. We will be putting it up on YouTube shortly after the webinar, so stay tuned for that. So just keep that in mind. We're going to have everybody's microphones and cameras shut off until the question period of time, but please feel free to use the chat. One of my co-presenters today will be moderating the chats, and then you'll be able to ask questions of those of us that have experienced some or all of the GDR. So before we get started, the Great Divide Trail Association is committed to reconciliation, which starts by taking this and every opportunity to acknowledge and honor and our privilege and honor to live, work, and play within Treaty 7 territory. We honor and acknowledge that the GDT passes through traditional Indigenous territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Stoney Nakoda, the Tsuut'ina, Cree, Secwepemc, Laidley Tene, Tunaha, Sinai Chista, sorry, and Métis. Apologies to anyone from those families if I've mispronounced your name. The Great Divide Trail Association would like to invite you to advocate for what you love and to preserve nature for future generations to enjoy while educating yourselves and others on the Indigenous history and perspectives. The GDTA would also like to highlight that there's some events, a lot of events coming up. This is sort of a busy pre-hiking, get excited, get in there, get your gear and get involved time. So we obviously have today's event. There's a gear webinar coming up on the 20th of February, which you can see the link for on our website to register, and you'll see a shout out on social media. We'll be premiering, date to be determined, a nice documentary called Wildflowers that features the Great Divide Trail. There's also the Great Divide Trail Film Festival that's happening May 8th, and the Great Divide Trail Gear Sale, which is done in conjunction with Gear Trade in Okotoks. So those are some pretty great events. They're a great way to kind of stay involved with the GDT community and also give back to the GDTA so that we can keep building and maintaining that trail and potentially, to be determined, any potential future northern extension. Which is, again, another way of saying there are lots of ways you can contribute by participating in this event and others. We thank you. But the one thing you can do that has probably the biggest impact on the ability of the GDTA to continue doing this is to become a member. It's fairly cheap. There are a lot of membership benefits. Even if you're not planning on hiking the GDR or the GDT, just being a member really helps because it gives us effectively strength in numbers when we chat with the different parks, the different land managers and all the rest to say, hey, we'd really like to do some development and clear some trail. And we've got, at currently 600 people. I'd love to see that up at 1,000 and say, hey, we've got this number of backers that love this trail and want to see this area protected. So please consider becoming a member if you're not already. So now we can get into the fun stuff, the Great Divide Route. So today's speakers, we've got a handful of people, myself included, that have been out there with boots on the ground, that have experienced the Great Divide Route and loved it so much we're willing to talk about it on a beautiful Thursday evening for yourselves. So we have Dylan Ivins, who I had a pleasure hiking with a little bit last year. Kevin Sharman, who lives up in Tumbler Ridge and who's done an awful lot, not only scoping it out on the ground, but helping in the back end to kind of determine what the different best routes and options are, and hugely involved in where we're at now, which is the research phase of all of this. Then there's myself and my lovely wife, Eloise, We hiked last year, and we also attempted to hike the year before and did about 2/3 of it. So, and then last but certainly not least, the current record holders, I think by far, Meg and Bailey. And if you haven't read their blog, I highly encourage you to do it. And they whizzed through this GDR, but they'll get a chance to kind of tell you how their experience went. I think they might also win the record for the wettest crossing of it. So. All right. I'll only talk for a few more slides before I hand it off. Actually, I might be lying to you. I think they're making me do the other ones too. So first off, if you're dialing into this, you probably already know what the GDR is. So the GDR is a wilderness route that starts at Kakwa Lake, where the GDT ends, and ends at Monkman Provincial Park, which is up near Tumbler Ridge. You will, it effectively has the same ethos as the GDT, which is, can you go from point A to point B while following the continental watershed divide? And the answer is obviously yes, because some of us have done it. What I want to highlight, and if you haven't seen it, we haven't promoted it too much, but you see it out there now, is there is a route description and some information on the Great Divide Trails Association's website. You'll find it under the Go Hiking section hiking section. There's a little badge you'll see on there that says Great Divide Route, where you can read about it more. And I highly encourage you to do that long before you consider putting your feet on the ground. Tiny bit of history. So I think a lot of you, again, on this call, just looking at the names, may already know a lot of the history, but a lot of us are here because in 2022, Dan Durston and Ben Millen, and everyone knows Dan from the Durston Gear, and Ben is also a former board member on the GDTA. They did this hike, and they wrote a very impressive blog, and I think they inspired a lot of people, myself included, to give this a try. But they didn't do that just sort of on a whim and out of the blue. They looked in, and back in 2001 had found that a gentleman by the name of Walking Jim and his partner John Nagel had actually done a lot of this route back when we were not carrying Durston Gear ultralight packs and all sorts of resupplies and the rest. So that is an epic journey. If you can find the trail journals and some of the reports from that, I highly encourage you to seek that out. There's a link off of the GDT site where you can eventually find your way to that. But Dan and Ben based a lot of their journey off of that and worked an awful lot with Kevin, if I'm not mistaken, to kind of investigate and determine what that route was. And then in 2023, a couple of parties went out and tried it. That includes Eloise and myself. We did the first third and the last third and effectively yo-yoed that and never did get the middle third, which brought us to the unfinished business of coming back next year. And we were one of at least 3 parties, Meg and Bailey being one of the other parties and Dylan being the other one, that were out there and gave it a full try and completed it. So this is a very new route. The trail info about it is sparse but getting better. I think there's a pretty good description, but like this is not going to be your far out tells me I've got 0.8 kilometers to the next water and I'm 0.10 off of the trail. This is a very different. This is not your normal through hike for sure. So as the member of the GDTA board of directors on this call that has hiked it, I think it falls to me to really stress that the GDR is not currently part of the GDT. This is something, obviously, it ends where the GDT ends and you can do it. But what I want to say is that I'm quite passionate about this. I think I've got the bug. But the GDTA really wants to make sure that if we do this, if we develop this from a route, if we start making it a little bit more developed, at least in terms of the information and you know where that red line goes, that we do it correctly and we do it in a smart, disciplined way, which means talking to stakeholders and the folks that use that land, making sure that there are no environmental considerations and all the rest, and that we don't encourage people to go to an area that you know has the last endangered rhino in it, which obviously not, but you know what I mean. So this is under development. A further plug to become a member, you'll only make this go faster if you want to see it become a thing. It's not currently a thing, but we are going to do our best as a trail association to sort of shepherd this through into becoming reality. And the other part, and I think you'll see a lot of head nods, and hopefully you'll hear all the same thing, is that the GDT, the GDR is not the GDT in terms of how hard it is. And I think if anybody's hiked the GDT is also quite a bit harder than a lot of other trails you've done. So if you want to stack these things, keep that in mind. The GDR it's a wilderness route. It is not a trail. There's very few parts, a little bit at the beginning and a little bit at the end where you'll be sitting, your feet will be treading on a trail. The rest of it, you're on your own. You're bushwhacking, you're going through alpine, super wet meadows. It's really hard. And I think that I hope is the takeaway that people take. That's obviously going to drive a lot of you. Great. But at least go in with your eyes wide open that this isn't your through hiking picnic. So we definitely recommend that you research it, you attend a webinar like this or watch it on YouTube, do your research, have bailouts, plan for longer days, those kind of things. Okay. I have 5 slides here on some risks and GDR specific threats. Now, if you're a hiker, this is where you might, experienced hiker, you might zone out. I encourage you to not zone out. I'm going to keep these short, I promise. But a few GDR specific risks that you need to be aware of is just one is the remoteness of this. If you've done the GDT, you know that it ends in Kakwa and you then have a 2-day hike out. That's where it starts with a 2-day out. And that's one of only 3 access points, which I'll chat about in a second. So if you get into trouble out there, or you don't bring enough food, or you get shin splints, or there's an animal encounter, whatever, you are multiple days out and probably going to have to call a helicopter in, and nobody wants to be the one that had to do that. But this is not, no one's coming to get you. You're going to be quite remote and probably quite remote to the nearest bail point. In that same vein, it's also very physical and very slow. And I love this picture because that's Eloise hiding in the back of an absolutely insane amount of thick bush that we had to go through. And you'll hear this from the others when they get a chance to speak. Like, you'll be bushwhacking a lot. You'll be going up steep things. You'll be side hilling seemingly forever at one point, and wishing that you had 4 legs like the bear. Lots of micro navigation. You will go a lot slower if you. I think Dylan's got a good point he'll bring up later, but like, you really have to plan your pace on this and don't be that bravado hero. It will be quite slow. There are also a couple of rivers, namely the Narrowway. If you read Dan's blog, the first one, he said that him and Ben had to swim it because they came at a high tide. Eloise and I were out the year after, and we found a wonderful spot to cross. It was nearly shin deep. And Megan Bailey went out first last year, and that spot was a terrible spot to cross. So in particular for the Narrowway, like, you may get to where we crossed this year and find that it is horrible, and you'll have to scope it out. And that might take you an extra day to find another route. So, and that's just the Narrowway. That's the worst of them for sure. It's definitely crossable. We did it last year. We did it the year before. But just, you need to know, you need to watch. If it ends up being like a rapid snow melt, or you're out there early, it will be, that could be a showstopper. You might have to turn around for sure. And then bear safety. We had some encounters. We'll talk about them a little bit later. We saw 6 bears and no humans in this stretch. We got charged by a bear despite doing all of the air quotes right things. Luckily that ended okay. We got turned around and had to wait out a day because the bear was blocking the pass, and I didn't know the secret password to get it to go the other way. And more to the point, a lot of the bears you see further south are used to living around humans. They know to avoid you. They know the rest. I am confident the bear that charged us may have never seen a human before in its entire life. So keep that in mind. If know your bear safety. And the Picture there is a bear hang. That is indicative of the trees. There are no good trees to do the single limb bear hang. You need to learn how to do the single tree bear hang. You're gonna have to watch a lot of videos. Happy to talk about that later if anyone's unsure. But you're probably gonna have to take too much food to carry unless you're super speedy. You're gonna need a way to put it safely, and there won't be good trees. So unless you want to make bear piñatas, you're gonna need to learn some skills there. I'm going to skip over one slide, and then Kevin, if you're available, it would be awesome if you could chat about sort of your experiences last year and the year before, and sort of your involvement with it, and give me a good like 5-10 minute break from chatting.
Sure. Can you all hear me?
Sure can.
Yeah, my involvement with this goes back a ways, back to this first recorded attempt of walking Jim Stoltz and his buddy. I got a random email, which led to me agreeing, maybe foolishly, to carry in a food resupply for walking Jim and John into the halfway point at Warner Lake in 2001. So lots of stories behind that, but basically I met them. They had left Kakwa Lake, I think 8 days previous. They were very happy to see me. They wanted a personal delivery of the food because if it was hung up in a tree, like Steve said, it may or may not be there when they got to it. So chatted with these guys, and I kind of filed this trip away in my mind as this is wild. Like, I don't know, I'd love to do parts of it, but the whole thing sounds pretty killer. They had a particularly wet session pretty well the whole time. If you read their journal, it's kind of a sufferfest, to be honest. Up there with Megan and Bailey's as far as rain amounts. So that was really cool. I just kind of forgot about this until Dan Durston got a hold of me in 2021. He made an attempt to get a start on it in 2021 as a solo trip. That didn't quite work out, so he came back in 2022 with Ben. So I've had involvement with pretty much everyone who's done the route or parts of it, which has been really cool. But also working with a fellow named Casey Kaznowski, which a lot of you may know, who's taken a mission to compile all the literature, route descriptions, really fine tune the route. I started working with Casey, and I knew some of the northern part of the route from my experiences from hiking in Tumbler Ridge. I've been in Tumbler for 40 years. So I had a bit of background around the Limestone Lakes, the Monkman Tarns, those kind of areas. Warner Lake, the halfway point, I'd been there numerous times. So I got thinking, I should do this. Like, I'm not getting any younger. I was 65 when I did it last year. But I'm not sure if I'm up for the entire route because, although Dan and Ben at that time had done it in 7 days, I knew I wasn't capable of that. But I thought the southern half could be perfect session for me for what I call the seniors portion. Seniors portion is still a pretty full portion, I got to say. So I decided to give it a shot in from the Alberta side. You can access, as Steve mentioned, 3 different ways: the McBride side, the Monkman end on the north end, and also the Grand Prairie side, I'll call it, in to the west to get into the Kakwa Lake area. So I got my dear wife to drop me off for the Kakwa side, or for the Grand Prairie access side. She picked me up at the Warner Lake trailhead from the ATV route that leads to Warner Lake 7 days later. And to make a long story short, it was a really wild trip. I'd kind of timed it for a weather window. I'm retired, so I get to do that. And I'm glad I did. I started out in the rain, a couple of days of miserable weather, but then I hit probably the best weather that anyone has recorded on that trek. And I'm not I'm not ashamed of that. It was partly on purpose. My hiking in Tumbler Ridge, I've been there a long time, and we don't really have a lot of trails to hike on. So my perspective is probably a bit different than the main audience, and certainly the people that have done it. I've never actually done a through hike. But probably my longest hike back in the day has been 7 days. So hiking in the Tumbler Ridge area means bushwhacking. So I actually grew up on that. I'm a geologist. I've had entire summers of that kind of thing with no trails. So it was pretty familiar to me starting out hiking around Tumbler, but that is a hiking experience there. If you want to go into the high mountains, you're going to suffer a bit to get to the Alpine and then hopefully stay high as much as you can. So that aspect of it didn't worry me. Doing it for day after day after day did. It's not all bushwhacking, but it's more, every day has some off trail travel through the woods, not like non-alpine terrain, put it that way. So I was comfortable with that end of it. I just didn't know whether I could sustain that for that many days in a row. And it was tough. I'm not a big, long, mega 12-hour plus day hiker at the best of times. My days on that trip were, there was one short day because I got to the Narrowway and crossed it and decided that was enough for the day. I was so happy that I made it across without drowning that I just made camp and enjoyed the sandbar. But 7 days was the shortest. 7 hours was the shortest day. 10.5 was the longest day. That's getting up there for my endurance level. Unlike the people who did it in 7 days, Ben and Dan and Megan and Bailey. The thing about the bushwhacking aspect of it is you really can't hurry. Like you can't go twice as fast as a person who isn't as fit. You can go faster for sure, but there's a safe limit to the speed that you can bushwhack at with the slippery ground, the deadfall, and just the need to keep it in check, especially when it's wet and slippery. So the fact that these people did it in a shorter time meant that they could put in massive days, like 12-hour plus days. I'm just not into that as a senior, so that wasn't part of my plan. I had kind of, with Casey, looked at how long it would take and what were reasonable type of days. And the plan I made actually worked out well. As I mentioned, I had really good weather, so that wasn't a factor for slowing me down. It was just the conditions, what I encountered slowed me down. But, no different than other bushwhacking I'd done, just more days of it in a row. So I had a great time. It was to my limit. I did it solo, not maybe my first choice, but my wife comes on some of these bushwhacks. She's very tough, but it was a little long and a little uncertain for her. I had a partner in town I do a ton of my hard trips with. He just couldn't squeeze away from work. So I've done solo trips, but never that long. But that worked out okay. I didn't start talking myself too badly. But it would have been nice to have a partner for safety's sake and just for the reassurance, like, is this smart? Should I be wading across the Narrowway at this point or not? So to sum it up, it was an absolutely fantastic trip. It's one of the best I've done, bar none. Scenery wise, absolutely. The big thing that sticks out for me is that it is so remote, you don't see anything. Like I saw a couple of pine beetle areas that crews had flown in to chop trees and burn them. That was it. Like no fire rings, no kind of old trails. I might have seen the footsteps of Megan and Bailey because they did it about a week before I did, but that was it. And so that to me is the big strength of the GDR. You've got that. It's pretty hard to get that experience outside of, I don't know, Northern Canada and Alaska. So highly worthwhile. If you're not up for the full journey, I'd recommend the half, either the north half, but probably the second half might be a little better if you're just doing half. But highly recommend it, but keep in mind that bushwhacking, it should not be your first bushwhack, in my opinion. Practice a bit on that, see if you like it. Anyway, I'm good for that. Thanks,
That's
Steve.
amazing. Thank you so much, Kevin. That's you said a bunch of things that I was hoping that would come out tonight. One is the work that Casey put in. So that was something just for everyone's awareness. Yeah, Casey has done an awful lot of work. He unfortunately had another commitment at this time, so we couldn't have him join us today. But his His website is linked off of the GDT's website, so it's a little easier to find now. He often frequently posts in the Facebook thing as well. We've chatted with him, and so we're kind of combining forces. But he has done so. Him and Kevin have done so much in the last while to collect this information. And then your other point about just how wild it, like absolute wild and remote it is. I think one of the things I was always saying back home was just how not only did I not see a human for 11 days, I didn't see signs of human for 11 days, which I don't know where you can get. And so if there's any one of you 50 people on this call today, or the however many watch the YouTube video that do end up hiking it, I ask, like, I beg and plead to just try and keep it that way. Don't make fire rings. Don't make signs of human. Don't go putting flagging tape. Like, um, keep this very remote, very wild, so other people can have the same experience that we just had. And that's one of the reasons why I said the GDTA is taking a very measured approach to our involvement in this and seeing how we can balance those two of making sure people can get out there safely and enjoy it, but also keep it and keep that experience. Um, you don't only want to hear from me, and we're going to get to the other two. I just, since it was brought up, I'm going to jump back to this access slide I didn't show earlier. So just in terms of how you can get on the GDR, Kakwa Lake is sort of the natural start point, in my opinion, because it is the sort of end of the GDT. And so any way you can get off the GDT, you can get onto the GDR. So there's sort of an east exit and a west exit. Or you can hike your way in, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. There is that Warner Lake access point, where is the one spot you pass sign of human activities, which is that remote ATV track that Kevin mentioned. I wouldn't count on a lot of people being up there, though it is a little bit more accessible. And then it's the exit near Tumbler Ridge, which is at Monkman Provincial Park, which is, I think you'll hear from Meg Bailey or Dylan, like once you hit the actual park boundary and a trail starts, you almost drop to your knees and kiss the dirt because you're no longer bushwhacking finally. Um, so yeah, those are the accesses. Again, those are on the website. And so there's a bit more detail there if you have trouble finding those. So let's pass it off to Megan Bailey and let them talk a little bit about their experience and their wet experience.
So we didn't do a lot of preparation for this, so we're just kind of going with what we remember. But everyone keeps talking about how we did it really fast. 7 days wasn't fun. We just thought, oh, we want to carry less food. It's going to be quicker if we have less weight, so we'll do 7 days. It was rough, 7 days. We had to ration our food at the end, and that's not something I would recommend. I think Sufferfest is pretty accurate. After Warner Lake, the bushwhacking becomes pretty thick for us with our rationing of food and the weather decline. So that bushwhacking was pretty slippery and wet. It was rough. It started to feel a bit like a survival mission. At one point there, we're like, we got to get out of here. We're soaking wet, our tent's leaking, we're saturated, we're getting chafe, I have shin splints. It got a bit rough there. I think if we do it again, satellite maps would have been a lot more helpful, just because we didn't have those. And once you hit a meadow, you're like, oh my God, freedom. You can breathe, you can see. And so I think having satellite maps would have made that a lot easier. I think Ben and Dan, I remember reading somewhere that someone did, and I think that would have made it a lot easier. Yeah, I would say it's a lot more low valley bushwhacking than we had expected. And maybe if our weather was better, we could have done more like alpine. But because of our weather, we just kind of stuck to the routes that we had and just tried to push through.
Yeah, I'll just chime in a bit. Yeah, I think like Bailey said, we had some really bad weather, and that really added to the suffering that we went through. If you're gonna do this, yeah, I would not plan to go in for 7 days, maybe like 9 or more. We were moving incredibly slow, like sometimes 14-hour days, only moving like 24 kilometers, 25 kilometers. It was incredibly slow some days. Yeah, we hit a point where Bailey got a shin splint. Thankfully, it was at Warner Lake, and we had to make a big decision whether we push forward or we bail out. The reality of like you getting hurt in here and a helicopter coming in, it's going to take a long time. The bush is really thick. Yeah, like it would be a really hard helicopter rescue. So that's a really big thing to consider, I think. Just the safety aspect. And yeah, just like something Steve mentioned, this is a wild trail, and I think we all want to keep it that way. So just keep that in mind when you're out there. It's a really, really untouched, beautiful land. And, you know, we have a lot of bad things to say about the weather, but even though the weather was really bad, it was really beautiful. Like Bailey and I were still blown away, even in our soggy state. That's all I have to say, really.
That's amazing. I suspect there's going to be lots of questions for you when we get to the open mic question period, because I know I was sort of blown away with what you guys accomplished and just how you accomplished it. And then I read your very well written blog and I went, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm gonna pass it down now or over now to Dylan, who Eloise and I had the pleasure of starting our last year's GDR attempt with, and he's a good guy. Now, I will say, when you look at his itinerary, he also like frequently attempts to set fastest known time. So again, consider that if you're like, oh, I'll do it in 8 days. I saw that Dylan did in 8 and Megan Bailey did it in 7. Like, keep in mind, these people are um, the real deal for sure. Over to you, Dylan.
Thanks. I've only tried one and failed. So anyway, yeah. So going off what Steve said, just about access, it's tricky to get just to the starting point of the GDR. So Steve and Eloise and myself all kind of had the same idea where we joined up with a GDR sort of GDTA trail maintenance work trip that up at right near the end of the trail, and timed our hike right after that. So we were able to get ourselves into the woods, although the complication was we had to account for an additional huge resupply of food that we had to somehow get with us to the start of the GDR. But once we had that sorted out, at least we were already near Kakwa Lake, and then we got to Kakwa Cabin and started heading north together. So our first, you can see the first 3 days on our itinerary. So the first trip from Kakwa Cabin to Jarvis Cabin. For people who haven't or who have looked at any data about the route, that's mostly on, I mean, what you call quote unquote trail. You at least navigationally have something to follow. The first half of that is easy to follow. The second half of your day would be a lot harder to follow. It's a trail that hasn't been maintained in probably decades. So there are blazes patched into trees if you keep an eye out for them, but it's not at all obvious. The tread isn't obvious at all on the ground, but you can navigate. There's a little less mental load for navigation just because you do have a little bit of an aid there. And then the next day we hiked as well together down to just shy of the Narrowway, and then the following day to Watton Pass. And then we parted ways. Basically, although we knew that we each were planning to do this at the same time, we hadn't planned to do it over the same time period. We had different size resupplies. We were planning to do the trip in a different number of days. So eventually we had to part ways because there was no middle ground. I couldn't take any of their food to meet them in the middle, or I couldn't whip them to just hike faster. So we parted ways, and then and I took off solo. And then going off of, I think Kevin mentioned it, doing this trip solo, I mean, it can be done, but I'd say really look at that with some caution. Everything about this area, I mean, it's so remote. You just feel very exposed. I thankfully didn't run into any bears. While I was with Steve and Eloise, a group of 3 bears, a mother with 2 cubs, came towards us. Thankfully, we hollered and they headed the other direction before anything went south. But going solo after that, now I knew that well, now I have to handle everything by myself. And everything you read about bear encounters is, there's safety in numbers, right? As the more people you have, the safer you are. And so I was the least safe you could be now. So just the bear safety, making plenty of noise, like that was just at the forefront of my mind. Was just always, I was just anxious for most of the trip. And maybe that was different for me because we had that experience right before I started going off solo. As I've been in bear country plenty of times before, but I don't know, it was just a different sense of now that I'm really out there on my own. So it's just something to be aware of. And then I'm just looking at the slide here. For those who can see the slide, you've got my itinerary. Something I was thinking about while Meg and Bailey were talking. If you haven't read their blog, read it. It's great. But I noticed that a couple of times, at least once, Meg and Bailey were forced to just, well, we're camping here. Find the flattest patch of forested, ground, ferns, vegetation, whatever. This is camp. This is home for the night. I got pretty lucky, not heaven lucky with weather, but I had an okay time. And so I was able to head for certain areas that looked like or had already been recorded to be decent decent terrain for camping. I would highly recommend if you want to just earmark some of these things, if you're seriously considering the route. Release Pass, there's an area just past it, which is excellent. The unnamed pass before Wapiti, unfortunately, it is an unnamed area. So many of these areas don't really have good references for us to share because they're in the middle of nowhere and no one really has tagged them or given them names. But this is Steve, are we planning on looking at the route itself maybe later, or is we just kind of leave the nitty gritty details out of it and stay kind of broad for today?
So we don't have a more detailed map of the route up on a slide here. It's something we can maybe pull up, but feel free to kind of like describe it as best you can there. And I think the people are keen to hear that kind of side of things.
Sure. So there's an area, after Warner Lake and before Tuck Lake, which are major lakes you'll see if you look at the topography of where the route passes through. In between those two, you have this little side valley that leads up to a steep little alpine area with a lake tucked into it, and it was beautiful. It was one of my favorite campsites of the trip. The following day, after going through the Bramstead, which most people who've done this trail think of as like a 4-letter word, I was able to get to an area above the limestone lake, which was really nice. And then the following day camped, the Monkman Tarns are just a beautiful area. So anything you find there is going to be nice. But I would actually recommend almost any of my days, any of the stopping points I had. I was lucky for weather that I wasn't forced to hunker down and cut any days short during my solo time. Day 3, well, Stephen and Eloise will probably mention it, was a day that we were hiking together, and the weather turned south, and the area we were about to head to was pretty exposed, so we decided to just call it a day and just have a shorter day. Thankfully, we had enough food that was an option, which is going to be a recurring theme. Like, don't short yourself on food because you're in the area of like big unknown, so you don't want to be giving you. It's nice to have that buffer. Along with what I was saying about the limestone lakes area, I really like, what's the word, like micromanage. If Megan Bailey regretted not having the satellite maps, like I spent more time than I probably needed to looking at satellite maps beforehand and having them downloaded like with me and all these like little alternates. Like I really poured all my spare time into looking at the route beforehand. So I looked at a couple of places that I wanted to explore as possible alternatives or improvements to the route. And this is what's cool about this route being so young, is that everyone that hikes it is like a possible, like you're just a fellow like explorer through this area. And the official information that we have right now is like nothing but like the least bad way that people have gone so far. So it's like the whole thing is a work in progress. So certainly don't feel like, it's nice to know there is a line there that has worked for people already. So like you've got that to go off of, but at the same time, we want, I mean, it's cool to contribute your own intel and efforts and build this thing into the best kind of path and route that it can be. So I was lucky to go through a couple different sections that hadn't been explored on this route before, and that now became like the official suggested line. So one of those, actually, Stephen and Megan Bailey might be happy or frustrated to hear that you no longer have to do the bushwhack after Warner Lake up to like Gusty Lake. So I found a line that goes up directly from Warner Lake up to that area, and there's none of that cliff band navigating and bushwhacking or whatever. It's all gone for future hikers, and it also made it 3.5 or 4K shorter. So it's like this thing is constantly improving, which is really cool. So don't feel the need to stick to that line if you're comfortable kind of like trying new things. And in a lot of the resources that are on Casey's website, there is like areas for further exploration. Like it'd be great if someone went this way, tell us how it goes. But it's intimidating too, because it's like, then you're again just out into the unknown. Like it might be horrible. You're just going to be heading into a swamp or whatever. But I mean, part of that's all part of the fun. You do your research beforehand and make your best guess, and then hopefully you've got enough food that you can just backtrack a few hours if everything goes south. But I had a great time. It's certainly one of the most intense trips I've done, just mentally. Just the feeling of being solo and being very, very far from home is something that I hadn't quite. I didn't anticipate just the level that went to. So it was a solo experience though, so probably different if I had. And I actually did feel a lot different when I was hiking with Steve Eloise. It's just you're with other people, you're talking about stuff. You feel a lot more comfortable with other people. But yeah, I thought it was incredible. The scenery, as everyone's going to mention, is just unmatched. It's great. I mean, there's lots of beauty in the Canadian Rockies, obviously, but just the combination of the wild scenery and just that feeling of full wilderness. That this looks everything everywhere you look. This just looks exactly how it has looked for the last hundreds, thousands, a long time, and that's just a really cool feeling. And so, yeah, highly recommend it as long as you are experienced, have some experience with this sort of thing, and know what you're getting into.
Really well said. Thanks, Dylan. That's so good. Yeah, definitely echoing what you said. Like anybody who goes out and you're going to do your research, and maybe this is part of your research, but you'll be going to Casey's resources that he's been collecting, and you'll see the red line is as best as anyone can think. It's definitely not a thing to look at and say, oh, I'm 10 feet off of it, because there is no 10 feet off of it. It's just sort of this way seems to be kind of okay. And it's peppered with, thanks to Casey, it's peppered with the people who have come before's, yeah, this place was definitely bad or seemed a bit better than the person who said it before. Everybody who goes out every year will be a little bit more empowered and informed than the people that came before. And that's where we're at with this. So that's really good. But you're definitely not, like I said before, it's not far out. You're not staring at it and saying, and it's not doing the work for you for sure. You're going to need lots of other resources. I checked with Eloise. She wants me to do the talking. So I don't want anyone thinking I'm just the loud, overbearing loudmouth. I mean, that's true, but in this case, I did check. So
I'll correct you when you get things wrong.
So I'd like to say, compared to my co-presenters, Eloise and I are far more average and normal. I think I'm in awe of the accomplishments of everyone that came before, including Ben and Dan, of course, as well. As you can see from this, we took a lot longer, but before I talk about this itinerary, I think I need to tell a little bit of a story. So this was last year's itinerary. We tried to do the GDR the year before. We actually did a lot of research. I learned how to make my own maps. I read all of the blog, singular, that I could, Dan and Ben's. We put together a plan. We took 14 days of food on our back. We were going to give this a go. And if anybody read Dan's blog, he kind of, he makes it sound amazing and doable. And obviously it is doable. He highlighted a few places where it was a bit sketchy, and I chatted with Dan before we went, and he said, yeah, maybe check out this line. That might be better. You probably don't need to swim if you go further up the narrowways. Like, check that stuff out for me. So we started out, and we were full, it's just a hike. We did the GDT. Eloise is Triple Crown. Like, we know how to hike. This is good. And we get out there, and on the second day, we come up to one of your first obstacles after the Jarvis cabin is a little place called Manias Pass. And there's a head wall there. And we're looking at the line that Dan and Ben had provided on their GPS track. And it is effectively going vertical, like straight up vertical. And we're looking at that, we're like, well, that can't possibly be right. And then when we get closer and closer and closer, and it was 100% right. And we had a chat, and we're like, are we doing this? And we tried it. We got about a third of the way up, hands shaking, knees trembling, like hand and knees kind of climbing. We're right on their line. And then we looked at each other and said, I guess this is where we're done. Like, we're going to have to turn around. And so we had to tail between our legs, go back down, had a very sad dinner, and said, well, we can either go home or maybe we could scout out another route. And so luckily the next day, after we regrouped and got our things, we found another way up. But the real kicker of all of this was that Dan and Ben's, I think Dan had put on CalTopo a map, and he had marked 3 or 4 places that said dangerous, steep, cliff bands, and this head wall had nothing on it. So it's safe to say that our confidence was shot with the intel that we had in front of us, because we said, if this wasn't an obstacle worth mentioning, then what are those obstacles that they had mentioned? So we did our best, but we only got to the narrowway. The weather had also taken a turn. We weren't sure what we were getting into, and we said, okay, well, why don't we turn around, make sure the narrowway is passable, but let's turn around and we'll try it from the other end. And so we effectively did the first third of the GDR and then went back up to Kakwa, or up to Monkman, and did the first third from that side. And when we were on the first third from that side, I remember turning to Eloise one day, stopping, and I was like, are we having a good time? Because this is really hard. So we never did finish the GDR that year. I think we went home very humbled, a little defeated. But that's to say, when we came back the next year, we were a lot more prepared. And also another party had gone through. There was a Moser party that had gone through, and they had done the northern section as well. So we were sort of reinvigorated that this is doable. And so that's what you see in front of us is when we went last year, we anticipated it taking about 10 days. But given just how hard it was, we took 14 days worth of food. And so we had a backup. We also did a couple of things differently that I'd highly recommend. So one, given the remoteness and the fire dangers, we had Eloise's mom in Scotland watching the BC fire map and watching our GPS track. And I had our Garmin on track mode. And she was able to send us there's fire up ahead or there's not. So we actually had, and we've never done that before, but having somebody watch for those dangers, because there's no way you're going to know. And the fire danger when you leave versus the fire danger on day 7, how would you know, right? You need, unless you had somebody back home feeding you that. So definitely something to consider. I think Dylan mentioned the beginning's kind of nice. Kakwa to Jarvis is it's overgrown, but there's a trail. Jarvis up towards the Munias area, there was probably a 20-year-old trail, and it was a bit frustrating to try and find it, but you can kind of work your way through. And then you got some alpine, and it's really nice. And that's why the numbers on that side were higher. And then you look on the Monkman side, you've got, once you hit the Tarns, it's nice, beautiful open alpine. And then once you hit the trailhead, you can just fly. So those are kind of beautiful. It's everything in between that's quite slow. And there are a couple of asterisks on there. So Dylan mentioned the Watton Pass day. We were hiking up there, and it wasn't much past lunch, maybe 2 o'clock. And it's getting colder and colder and windier and windier. And then we shouted forward to Dylan, who was faster and slowing himself down. We said, Dylan, like, this is getting pretty bad. We should probably stop. And he's like, well, it's not like it's going to snow. And as the words come out of his mouth, the snow starts coming, and which is, this is August. You're going to get snow on this route, almost certainly. If you're not, you're going to get really cold rain or you're going to get snow. So we had to like bunker down and wait it out, and it ended up being waiting it out all night. The other asterisk on the below Paxumo is another. We were making okay time, but we didn't think we could make the next marked camp spot, and we didn't know what we'd be getting into. And you're just looking at a topo map, and we don't have a lot of intel from before. And we were like, well, I don't want to camp on a side hill, so we ended up cutting the day short out of not sure we'd stumbled upon a good place to camp. And so that was, again, your luck might be better next year. You might be a little further ahead, and there might be a bit more intel on good places to camp. But that's another reason why you just can't always do the speed you want to do. Or you're going to have to be okay to put in, 16-hour days. And then the day 8 below Weaver, there's a spot, one of my favorite spots on the GDR. So nice. I've done it 3 times now. Is below Weaver Mountain. Absolutely beautiful valley. I think there's another party, the Moser party that went out the year. I think they were calling it like the Mordor Valley or something like that. It's so absolutely stunning. You walk up this thing. It is very overgrown, and you find yourself walking in a stream, basically. And the day before, we had been charged by a bear, and as we get to this stream and we turn down to kind of go in and start heading into that narrow valley, the largest grizzly bear I've ever seen in my entire life just started trundling out of the water. We shout at it, and it's like, I don't know that I care. You're too like pipsqueaks to me. So we back away. We lost sight of it, and then we realized, well, actually, I don't know if it ran up the creek the way we're going or down the creek away from us. And at this point, it's a coin flip. If we chased it, if it went the way we're going, we'll be chasing it all night. And I don't know that I really want to be chasing a grizzly bear in a stream where you have no visibility. So that was a night where we probably could have hit 20K that day. At least we could have hit 15, no problem that day. But we had to turn around, walk back another kilometer to a decent spot that was flat and far away, where we're pretty sure the bear wasn't going to find us. Hang all of our bags, our food and everything, and call it a night. So that 10K day that was just us responding to the environment that was presented in front of us, right? Like the good choices. So if you do go out there, the moral of all this whole story is like, one, a little bit of humility would probably take you a long way. And 2, like you really have to pack as though something's going to hold you back, be it your pace isn't there, or weather's not there, or an animal or injury, and bring extra food, because no one's coming out to drop you food unless you've unless Kevin's found a way to like drone ship something from Tumbler Ridge. I think you're on your own. So that was our experience. I would say I would go back in a heartbeat. It is quite possibly almost all of that my favorite place in the world. There's some really hard and frankly crummy parts of this trail that hopefully future versions can find ways around. There's some parts that there was a side hill that was only 1 kilometer and probably took us 3 hours. And the only way we got through it is we found a path that a grizzly bear had taken. And like, if you can step on the, what was that stuff called? The not crumholes. There's like that one particular plant. If you can step on the base of that plant where the grizzly bear stepped, you might not fall to your death, or your injury anyways. Anything to add? No? See, she didn't want to talk. I told her that. We are almost at question period time, but first I'm going to throw questions you're probably going to ask out. First off, do you need permits? No, there's no place up there that you need permits. I'll maybe, looking at it now, when you get to Monkman, no, those are free camping, weren't they? Monkman Provincial Park? Yeah. So no, actually, you do not need permits. You're good. So compared to the GDT, this is already easier. But is it hard? Holy crap, is it ever hard? That was Kevin's addition there, but I agree with it wholeheartedly. Dylan, did you want to say more? I think you already mentioned sort of your daily mileage estimate.
I didn't mention this part, but we were just chatting before we started up the webinar earlier tonight. Like as a rough estimate, because I'm sure a lot of people will be thinking, okay, well, how many days should I plan for hiking days? And my thought was that as a starting point, at least, if you put considerable time in hiking sections of the GDT, look at what you hiked in a full day, and what you'd feel like a full day of hiking would be, what distance you covered, and cut that and then go from there. For me, when I look back on the kind of days I put in hiking the GDT back in 2022, and then the distances I covered on the GDR last summer, a full day of hiking, probably hiked yeah. Anyway, the 2-to-1 thing is in the ballpark, so at least that gives you somewhere to start from, and then it'll vary day to day because you've got harder terrain and easier terrain, but at least that gives you an idea of what kind of a food load you'll be thinking about.
That's awesome. Thanks, Dylan. The next two questions, where can I resupply and how can I get to and from? The first answer is you can't. And the second answer is, as we mentioned before, there's sort of the three spots at the beginning, at the end, and there's one spot in the middle that isn't close to anything. So, kind of flippantly said you can't resupply, but like you could theoretically drive down that Walker Forest Service Road yourself and find or not the Walker Forest, the Warner Lake one, and cache yourself some food somewhere in a tree and hope it's there. But there is no real resupply option. Even getting resupplied at Kakwa is a bit of, you're a couple of days in to get to Kakwa, let alone just to start. So you got to keep that in mind. And then this has come up quite a lot in the Facebook forums. A couple of people saying, well, I'm just going to tack this on to the end of my GDT hike. A couple of thoughts on that. One is, if you've never hiked the GDT before, it's worth noting that sections F and G of the GDT are a different beast than sections A through E. So basically, north of Jasper is much, much harder than south of Jasper, and the GDT is already very hard. And yet this GDR is like on another level altogether difficult from F and G. So if you've hiked the GDT and you loved F and G, you probably will absolutely love the GDR, and you'll probably be fairly well prepared for it. If you've never hiked, if you've never backpacked, if you've never done the GDT, but you've done other hiking, just beware that the GDT is harder than a lot of those other trails, particularly like the PCT that I did. The GDT is not even in the same class in terms of difficulty, and the GDR is harder. So just go in well informed. You're going to have trouble resupplying for sure. You'll also be hitting it pretty late in the year, I would figure, if you tried to doing a no-bow keep going. Which means you'll be hitting some late season weather. So keep that in mind as well. If you're trying to SOBO and start all the way up in Tumbler Ridge, you're going to be there so early that I'd be worried about a lot of the river crossings, not just the narrowways. So that's something also. And I don't think there's a lot of intel. Kevin, actually, maybe if there's intel on river levels, late June, early July, like they must be pretty high up there, eh?
Yeah, not recommended river crossings, and you'd be post-holing through a lot of snow.
Yeah. So don't let me talk you out of it, but be informed. Like it's not just I'll just add this on. It's only an extra couple 100 kilometers. Like, it's pretty hard.
Steve, one thing to add real quick, for anyone that is going to be spending time on the GDT, if you just to work your way to an idea of what the GDR is like, there's plenty of alternates obviously on the GDT, and some of them do have venture off trail and get more difficult, and that's why they've remained as alternates. So like look at how you felt doing something like Barnaby Ridge, or I haven't done Coral Pass, but I understand it is like pretty much a bushwhack on the northern end of it. Surprise Pass is completely off trail. It's mostly alpine, so navigation isn't bad, but the level of physicality is there. So there's lots of off trail alternates that you can look at if you were thinking about doing this on the end of a GDT hike or something. At least that'll give you something to just measure yourself against. And even if you're not, it still will give you that kind of a bit of a comparison, at least in those are areas where there's well-established intel and you're not too far if you need to bail or anything like that. So yeah, just something to keep in mind.
It's awesome. Before we open it up to general questions, I guess, Dylan, Kevin, Bailey, Meg, is there any other sort of frequently asked questions you want to throw in there? Preempt some?
Don't let all this, it's really hard talk dissuade you from a good hike. Just work up to it. Do a few multi-day bushwhacks with better bailout options. Try it out. Go hike in the rain on purpose, and work up to it, and you'll love it.
Perfect. Then without further ado, we're going to open it up to some questions.
Should we do the ones in the chat?
We'll do the one, yeah. So we'll do the ones in the chat. I know we've said it a lot, but this is just such a beautiful place of the world, and so I hope a lot of you do get out there, spread out over time and dates, but just please help us keep it the way it is, and I'm sure you were all practice perfect, leave no trace, but do that on steroids if you can. This might be one of my favorite places in the world, and if you get out there, you'll definitely see why. So jumping into the questions and the Q&A stuff and through the chat. So for Megan Bailey, you said 7 days was really hard. To get perspective, what was your average daily distance on the GDT?
I think we were doing like around 30 kilometers on the GDT, but in a lot less time. Maybe hiking 9-10 hour days max. Yeah, what do you think, Bailey?
I don't know our kilometers, but we did it in 40 days, didn't we? With 3 days off or 4 days off?
Yeah.
Included in that?
Yeah, so it was like total 36 walking days, I think, or 37.
Yeah.
Dylan, did you did the GDT, did you not? Do you remember your day, Ken?
I know it was 27 days from Waterton to Jasper, just to Jasper, not the whole thing. Because then I took a break and finagled my way onto another work career so I could leave a resupply to do sections F and G, and that's before the lockers were at Blueberry, so I left a cap there. So I forget how many days that the last section was, but I mean, anyone who's looked at the itineraries, it sounds like Megan Bailey and myself were definitely around the fast one.
Yeah, and I can add that we were 100% on the average. We were about as average can be. I'll leave this for you guys to comment because I do too much talking. So Austin's asking, does Nobo or Sobo make more sense?
For the GDR?
For the GDR, yeah.
I think for us, it was really nice to finish on the trail. I don't know, but maybe some people have a different perspective on that. But I know being exhausted and having 40 kilometers left and hitting that trail was so nice. It just felt like the stress was gone.
Yeah, I agree.
Go ahead. And I think it's also a little easier logistically too, because it's tricky to get yourself to the southern start of it, to the beginning of the southern endpoint of the GDR, getting yourself either to Kakwa Lake or Jarvis but once you get to Monkman, that feels more like civilization. There'll be people there. I mean, you can hitch your way out if you need to or something, versus landing at Kakwa Lake and then having to either coordinate if you had someone to meet you on the east or west side, or then having to do the rest of the hike out. I don't know. I think I'd rather finish at Monkman knowing that you're done. You can sigh relief,
Yeah, I mean, I always have a tendency, it just feels more natural going north. I'm not sure why. I think, again, it's going to take you a little while to do this trail. Obviously, depending where you start. If you're starting super early, you might want to go Nobo just to give the snow melt a little bit more time, I guess. But yeah, I think you can definitely do it in both directions. Like I mentioned 2 years ago, we went in from the Monkman side and hiked down to the Framstead and back. And it was fine in both directions. There was nothing there that was, easier or harder from doing it that way. It's really pretty. All right. And regarding travel, how does the alpine terrain compare to 6 passes? I've never done 6 passes, but I think from the other comments, and Bailey and Meg, you guys did that?
Yeah, Six Passes has a lot less bushwhacking.
Yeah, essentially like no bushwhacking, I would say, or like low ground hugging shrub bushwhacking.
You know what I found on the alpine sections of the GDR that I wasn't used to is it's pretty bouldery. And I touch on this in the trip report that I put on Casey's website. Uh, you know, most of the Rockies is kind of lush, above tree line alpine. It's pretty good walking, spongy, mossy. There's a lot of bouldery sections that, you know, you think you're in the clear when you're above the trees, which obviously you are, but it's not as smooth as other alpine areas that I've hiked in.
Mm.
Yeah, I think I'll add. Oh, go ahead, Meg.
I was gonna say I would say Six Passes has some boulder sections though. There was some times hiking through rocks, so kind of similar there, I guess.
Yeah, I was gonna add that like I did not feel like there was very much alpine, despite Dan's insistence that we were getting to all the good stuff. It felt to me like there was an awful lot more bushwhacking or wet meadow marsh walking. Because again, the quickest way between 2 points is not bushwhacking, and so you end up finding these low open areas which tend to be soppy and wet, which again from a sustainability standpoint, if you're going through there, you know, spread yourselves out if you can or whatnot. But um, I felt like the Alpine was definitely stunning. There just wasn't, I don't know if I would hazard a guess to what percentage is Alpine versus all of the other crap. But I would say it's not above 30% probably. That's my guess. I don't know if you guys would agree.
It feels like there's less too, just because the bushwhacking takes so much longer. So,
Yeah,
Yeah, I can agree with that.
100%.
Yeah, I agree.
I actually have that data, more or less. So for people that are unaware, I also, after hiking the GDR, I continued and hiked from Monkman to Pine Pass, basically looking to see if it was possible to continue a hiking route further north through the Rockies. And then I was comparing some of the statistics for how much bushwhacking and alpine and stuff there are. Anyway, the Great Divide route, as far as the current GPS line, and then just ask Caltopo what the terrain breakdown is. And Caltopo will say 45% forest, 16% shrub, 31% grassland, 4% barren. And I'd count both of those as being like easy to navigate alpine stuff. Shrub is going to be somewhere in between. Sometimes shrubs sound terrible, but if it's small stuff, then it's not a big deal. And then forest isn't going to be all horrendous bushwhacking. Some of that will be like open, semi-open, or maybe some meadows that are giving you nice travel through there. But yeah, I'll share the link to the post on my blog after, and if people want to like look at that data or anything.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. The engineer in me would love that. Question from Sean says, interested to know what there is to see and how it compares to the GDT sections in terms of views. So it's a question about the views on the GDR, which I know there's going to be some strong opinions. So go ahead.
Well, Mount Ida is supposed to be what's the word, a rival for Assiniboine, right? So there's that.
I think it's pointier. It's the true Rockies.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is photo courtesy of Kevin, but that's Mount Ida on a nice sunny day. Holy crap. One of the prettiest things I've ever seen. 360-degree glacier views, like frequently, especially when you're up there where you get that view up at the Fay Lake and the Alpine Tarns. Like I think the GDT is kind of spoiled because every single day is pretty, except for maybe walking into and out of Coleman. But then the GDR is just like peaks like this in all directions.
I think the wilderness adds a lot to it as well. Like because it's so wild, you appreciate how beautiful it is even more.
Yeah. And I guess comparing to GDT sections, like I would say F and G, like certainly I think I mentioned that before, but it has that same sort of like wild, but also like Jack Pine Pass. Is that what it's called? The pass above the Jack Pine, like that. that area there near Blueberry Lake, like that has a lot of like that reminds me of a lot of what the GDR has on it, and that was one of my favorites. Glenn's asking, and I think this is directed largely at Eloise and I, having done it twice, saying, did you make any different gear decisions other than extra food? Though I think you can elaborate that to yourselves as well, like from your different hiking experiences. Any food or gear changes from you guys?
We didn't change anything.
Dylan?
I think if people are used to coming from a hike maybe that's not like the GDC or something in the Rockies, especially with all the bushwhacking, don't skimp on rain gear. Like this is not a trail for frog togs. You need something that's like gonna hold up to really like crashing through the forest. Not all the time, but when you need to, like you need to, and if your outer layers just get shredded, then yeah, you'll be uncomfortable.
Yeah, 100%. We didn't, even the first year, we were smart enough to ditch our frog togs and go to something a little bit more rugged. There's no way a frog tog's going to last you more than a day. And then you're going to be in trouble.
You definitely want to bring rain pants as well. Bushwhacking without rain pants is not super fun. The other things we did, because we knew there was a good chance we were going to get snowed on because we were a little bit later in the year, we did bring an extra layer each as well. So then we had something that we could hike in, that if it got wet, it wasn't the end of the world. And then we brought a much bigger, you can probably say what size, I don't remember, but we brought a much bigger battery bank as well, just because the GPS is so useful. So we wanted to make sure that we had enough charge for 14 days if we needed it.
Yeah. And on that, like I feel like from a map perspective, we had belt suspenders and somebody actively holding our pants up at the same time. Like we had a lot of redundancy on our map. So we printed out maps that I made myself. We also loaded up 2 different types of apps, just because you never know if one app's going to go flaky on you, because it updated before you went out. Was it overkill? Probably, but like really, if you're up there and you don't, suddenly your phone stops working, you need to have something else on you. If your partner's got the same map and same app as you, then like, you run the risk of that's the thing that's not working that day. We did have the satellite version and the topo version, so we can kind of look and compare. And as Bailey was mentioning, it was super helpful, as that was something I learned from Ben when I chatted with him afterwards, after our first failed attempt. So like little things like that, yeah. But I think that's largely it on the gear stuff. Otherwise, it was largely what we carried before.
Yeah.
All right, question from Connor, who says, everybody has rightfully stayed at the Jarvis cabin, but from what I read, the Munias Pass area is majestic. Any good camping spots with a view of Mount Ida?
I think, Kevin, did you camp up there?
Yes, I was sorely tempted. I came through the Jarvis cabin in the rain, soaked, pulled in, fired up the stove, and I was kind of waiting out the rain. I dried everything out, had a nap, and I had a kind of a go time of 5 o'clock that evening. If it stopped raining, I was going to press on to Munias Pass. If it didn't, I was going to hunker down, and it was getting more and more tempting by the minute. But I headed out. Took me, I think, 3 hours from the cabin to Munias Pass. And right at the south end of the lake, there's a really nice campsite, a lot of them. So all the way along the biggest lake that you hit first in Munias Pass. And they all have good views of Mount Ida. The picture we see right now is from the north end of that lake. A little swampy in spots, so you might have to hunt around for a campsite depending on the conditions. But yeah, I made a point of looking for a campsite there because there was an early explorer, Samuel Prescott Fay, went through there in maybe more than 100 years ago, and he said it was the most beautiful place he'd ever seen. It was the Matterhorn, blah blah blah. So I kind of wanted to reenact that, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah, and I think yeah, go ahead, Dylan.
I was just going to add, along the GDR, maybe another 2 hours once you go up the Munias head wall, which even we mentioned the steep head wall. You go over that and then go into the next area, and you reach another lake called Fay Lake, which basically is another rival for Flow Lake on the rock wall. It's got the same sheer, I don't know, 2,000-3,000 cliff right behind it. and then just a lake right there, and there's plenty of flat areas, camping and everything. So yeah, that whole area, you really can't go wrong in terms of campsites.
Yeah, that was what I was about to say as well, is like, I think as beautiful as Mount Ida is, if you miss that, like there is space around Fay Lake. Everything up there on that first sort of alpine little area is quite wet, but if you can find a dry spot up there, like, yeah, Fay Lake is flow lake with 0 people and like just a bit more majesty around it too. Which is hard to believe. So a question from Mitchell: how often are you bushwhacking under tree cover, so without any visual reference for navigation? My quick answer is almost always, but I'll see what the others have to say.
I think it's pretty often. I know there was some times where we could kind of like look up and around, but it was certain situations, like if we were on a hill or like just entering the bush, we could kind of pick our way around before. But yeah, sometimes you're just fighting through the bush in the forest and you can't really see where you're going.
Yeah, you can
Yeah,
normally
sometimes you
get a glimpse of the sun to try to follow in the right direction after you look at your phone, see the sun for a while, and try and keep on a rough bearing without whipping out your phone every 30 seconds as you're plowing along. So, you know, there are a few references, but yeah, generally it's tree canopy type of bushwhacking.
Yeah. Dylan, you had something?
I was just gonna say, often, I mean, you sometimes, yeah, you need your phone or GPS or compass or something to point you in the right way, but you do often get the handrail of the terrain. Like, you know, from this point, I just need to go down or up. So even if you can't kind of keep your visual, you know, have a waypoint to follow visually, it's just keep climbing, and then you can afford to check a little less often for the reassurance.
Yeah, I'll say, like, I found the micro nav pretty exhausting when you get into the trees there, because you'll have some good times, and then once you get into that, like when you're doing the micro nav, it seems to be almost endless. So you're like, oh crap, like, and we mentioned before, the red line isn't real. Like there will be a red line on your map, but in a lot of places, it's not like it's perfect to hike here. It's more of a guideline. There are a few spots where you'd be well to stick to the red line, but a lot of it is sort of like in this general direction. It's more open than the bushwhacking in this general direction. So you are generally kind of like pulling out your phone pretty frequently to say, oh, crap, okay, I think we might want to go a little bit further to the east or a little bit further to the west. So you do it a lot, I'd say. But you're right, like you kind of know you're going down or you're going west. It's just, you're kind of always a little bit like tied to you're like that red line. You're like, well, I want to go, somebody said it was good over here, so I'm going to try and go a little bit further more.
Yeah, I'd like to add that's when it's kind of nice to be in pairs too, because it's pretty exhausting. And then you can switch out like, okay, I'm done. You go ahead. Let me just try not to slip and fall for a bit.
Yeah. All right. A couple of the questions in here. That's great. Keep them coming. What time of year do you suggest attempting the GDR? July, August, I would say, eh?
I wouldn't go before mid-July. Ask Dan and Ben. It's just generally wetter. I mean, more snow, more post-holing potentially, and all those meadows that are wet year-round, they're even wetter in the early season. So August, I think it's an August trip myself.
Yeah.
Early September should be fine too.
You're probably going to get snow. I mean, we got snow in Kakwa in August, so I would presume you'd be prepared for snow, I guess. If
But
Yeah,
anytime.
possibility.
yeah. Question here. Ben mentioned that super soft trail runners weren't as ideal as a stiffer hiking shoe. Agree or disagree?
I lost the sole of my shoe because I was in
Yeah.
a trail runner, Hoka's, but I'd do it again in Hoka's. I think it's just your feet get used to it if you're a long distance hiker, and the trail runners are nice.
Yeah, I
Great
think
out
it's just
trail runners.
note that it's not gonna last. It's okay to wear, but it's gonna be pretty chewed up at the end.
Grip
Dylan?
is super important. I
Mm.
used Solomon Speed Cross 6s with nice aggressive lugs, and you got to have some traction in that slippery stuff.
Yeah,
Dylan?
something with a sole that you're confident feels good on wet terrain. I use trail runners and I do trail runners again, but yeah, know that they're going to get pretty chewed up.
Same. We both went out with our Ultra Lone Peaks and with a fresh pair, and they got chewed up. Of course they got chewed up, but I would do it again. I don't think I would. I'm not going to switch to your feet are going to be wet 100% of the time. Like if you go a full day with a dry foot, I'll buy you a beer because I don't know how you managed to pull that off, and I want to be your friend because you were going to have wet feet for however many number of days you're out there. Sean's mentioning, so a 45-pound pack, question mark.
I mean,
I would say it's
I think
based
you
on
can
your
still do
food.
this. Yeah. I mean, I think I was probably around, I tried like fairly light. I think I had about a 12-pound base weight and then 9 pounds of food. Let's say it was 2 pounds a day at 18 pounds. So there's a 30-pound pack. So, I mean, it's heavier than your short trips, but it doesn't have to be crazy.
Yeah. Megan Bailey, I saw your pictures. I don't think you had a 45-pound pack.
No, but
No.
I mean that's why we almost ran out of food too. So
Yeah. Yeah, I would say for us, like it was the food was the issue, right? Like we carried 14 days worth of food, which is absurd. And if I never do that again, that's fine. Unless I'm doing the GDR again, which I will definitely do it again. And then I had like 2 food bags in my bag. So I probably was pushing pretty close to 45. Like, well, maybe not 30,
Maybe 35.
maybe 35. Yeah. So, but I mean, basically it was my normal hiking setup, which is, 13-ish. With a little bit of extra like battery brick and an extra like warm layer. And then yeah, definitely like about 2 pounds of food a day. I think that's probably it for the questions that we see there. Again, if we've scared you off, then I apologize. I hope we didn't scare you off, but we instilled a little bit of extra diligence and research and gut checks and, like I said, humility in terms of your plan. I know when we did the GDT, when we hiked the GDT, we were like, we could do 30 miles a day, and then got our butts handed to us because the GDT was that much harder. And then, like I said, going out once gave us, humbled us again just on the GDR. So that so keep that in mind. Obviously, it can be done by rock stars in very great times. Maybe Eloise and I are the exception, but I like to think we might represent a more typical slower pace, I guess, compared to what you guys have there. Any final thoughts from Dylan, Kevin, Bailey, Megan?
One thing that just came to mind was, oh, go ahead, Kevin.
As it turns out, we've hosted all the finishers of the GDR at our place down the ridge over the years, even walking Jim and his buddy. So I can't promise that'll continue, but get a hold of me if you're coming out, and we'll see what we can do. A pickup from Monkman or pizza, etc.
The pizza was fantastic. Thank you,
Oh.
Kevin.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just add a lot of what we covered today and a little bit more detail on the GDT website. Like I said, you'll find that under the hiking section, under the section hiking section. And probably more valuable than the information that's currently on the GDT AIDS website is there's a link on that same page to the work that Casey has put in. So a big shout out to Casey, and apologies that he isn't here. I feel bad that we weren't able to get him here as well for you because he's done a lot of work. And if you were going to hike it, you'll almost certainly cross paths with him because he's hosting an awful lot, like the most up-to-date version of the collated intel about what the route is looking like right now. So thank you a lot, Casey, if you're ever watching this, for all of the volunteer work you've put into this. And I also want to say, I think there was 50 some of you on this call. And if you're watching this on YouTube, like if you want to see this, you know, maintained and protected, and the information coalesced into something more, more akin to like a full featured bit of information, one of the best things you can do is be a member if you're not already. If you are already, then I can't thank you enough. Like I said, being on the board, like it's those membership numbers, whether you're hiking or not, it's those membership numbers that really tell the story when we go to talk to the groups that are up here. And if you do hike this, like I said, I wish you all the best. You're going to have a lovely, absolutely amazing time. You're going to fall in love with the place. And if you see our bear, tell him we said hi. Thank you. Thank you, Dylan, Kevin, Bailey, and Megan as well. That was fantastic. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.